A Glance in the Mirror. Chapter 29. The Firstborn. This was the beginning of steps taken to restructure the printing workforce by the Master Printers Federation, as the coloured supplements started appearing in all newspapers. Countries abroad influenced changes too, their workforce being more flexible, easily controlled, and dominated by strong management. New techniques, working arrangement and modern machines were introduced without renegotiating new agreements with their unions. Holland and Singapore began to print much of the UK's work, undercutting British printers' effectiveness. The year 1963 saw the 12-month premiership of Sir Alec Douglas Hume, the surprise choice of the Conservative Party. He, predictably, came across as a reliable, trustworthy Prime Minister, who unfortunately had no persona for television and the media. He was a bad choice, not because his policies were bad, but because he didn't reflect the age of youth and scientific progress. There was to be great changes in industrial development, which did not bode well for Terry and Sally to plan their way forward. It was considered by government think tanks that motorways were the cure for traffic hold-ups. In 1963, it heralded the introduction to town planners and developers, proclaiming a new architectural design style to progress a brighter future. It was the promotion of concrete roads, embankments, slab-sided buildings, bridges, institutional buildings and council offices. These occurred up and down the country. Cities and towns, 40 years later, decried this misplaced zeal, began to haul down these edifices of poor design. It was so obvious that this utility building was neither long-lasting nor aesthetically pleasing. When Terry and Sally had been living at Pinner for just over a year, Sally decided that it was time for them to think about having a family. They were still saving hard for their own house, and the thought of having to do without one's salary in their saving strategy was worrying. They had never discussed having children, or, if children came along, what size family they would like. In fact, Sally had never shown any desire for children at all. She didn't enjoy their company particularly, show any regard for babies, or been envious of mothers-to-be. Perhaps working in a hospital may have been the stimulus, or that some of her friends were pregnant. This may have been the trigger. Whatever, she was adamant that they should start at once, whatever the financial ramifications. And after a couple of months, Sally began to question what was preventing her conceiving, for the desired pregnancy wasn't forthcoming. She consulted friends and colleagues at work. As she was still working at Wembley Hospital, she was in the right place to gain some of the answers. Eventually the family doctor was consulted, and the usual advice was given. Give it time, be patient, achieve the right temperature and posture. At last the day came when Sally had a pregnancy test that proved positive. It was a time for satisfaction and planned birth. Sally still cycled to work, and the months ticked by, until just a few weeks before the birth, expected sometime in early February. That summer Terry decided to take driving lessons in a standard Pennant car, setting off with a hill climb up the hill to the cinema along Pinner High Street, or trying to pull out from the parked cars going down towards Love Lane. Riding a motorcycle had made him road conscious, so that it didn't take him long to get the hang of driving or road conditions. Terry managed to pass his 11 lessons, a relief, because he badly needed the money. He sold the Triumph he had bought to replace the BSA, and took up the delights of car driving in a pale yellow Ford Anglia 1500 weight van for £150. It had only 3 forward gears and a side valve engine. This van was a valuable addition to the growing family. Terry soon appreciated the difference. Those freezing cold fingers, wet chilled feet, waterlogged shoes and bulky waterproof clothes, not to mention those awful raised white lines on a wet day coming round a corner that meant a possible fall, similarly experienced when going over a polished manhole cover or a pile of rotting leaves, the heart-stopping moment when us motorist suddenly opened his door to adjust the wiper blades, clean the windscreen, or to turn sharply without signalling. Now he was in the warm, keeping dry and safe. Their first child was born on the 5th of February 1960 at Wembley Hospital Maternity Unit. They named him Simon Roger after Sally's brother. Terry was 25 and Sally 28. They were both delighted that the birth had been a success, without any complications. Simon was delivered at the hospital because it was felt by doctors of the time that all firstborn babies should have the necessary emergency arrangements on hand. After 10 days, Sally was released from hospital. Carrying Simon carefully, they drove back to their parents' home, thinking that she could rely on her mother to make the passage of parenthood easier and develop a routine to transfer back to their flat at Pinner. It was a relief that her parents were so near and that Rita was happy to put up with the invasion. It was an ideal situation which lasted for a couple of weeks, but like all good things, had to end. The time came for them to collect up all the new baby's bits and pieces. Together, and with Sally's suitcase, they journeyed back to Pinner. When they got there, the pram was offloaded and wheeled up the front path. There, they suddenly realized the awful truth. The pram was too big. It wouldn't, with any twisting, turning, tipping, tugging, or be enticed around the front door and up the stairs. Now it's at this stage that Sally, getting more and more upset, refused to proceed any further, declaring that they were to return immediately to Priory Gardens. Their fateful return convinced the in-laws that here was a crisis that had to be sorted out, being fully aware that they would have to put up with an invasion yet again unless desperate measures were taken. A powwow produced a solution. They had to have their own home, and fast. Harry scanned the local papers for houses for sale. Both he and Terry went in the van to see some of the houses on offer, while Sally stayed behind with Simon. They had a long talk through the financial situation, knowing that Terry had a provident life with policy, capable of being converted to house purchase. The first house they viewed was built at the end of Norwood Drive, North Harrow. It was an untouched, typical Cutler house of 2 reception rooms downstairs and 3 bedrooms upstairs. It was on the market unoccupied, so they had to place to themselves as they walked round on its first and only inspection. It was exactly what they were looking for, and the garden laid out mainly with a lawn that was just perfect for their new family. Harry negotiated a price of $3,200, which he thought was just about affordable. Sally thought it was suitable and agreed that they should go ahead. When Terry was 17, his aunt had explained that he should devote some of his wages to take out a provident life policy, to save and later convert to house purchase. And this seemed like an excellent idea, and Terry completed the paperwork at once. And this cost him in the region of £17 a month, which was a lot of money to him, being almost 1 week's wage. How pleased he was now, when it became clear that this policy would be their salvation, for it allowed them to put down a deposit of $2,300. However, they needed another £500. Terry's father-in-law once more stumped up the amount needed, put the transaction through the bank's lawyers, and had the deeds checked out. How lucky they were that he was the bank manager, fully conversant with such matters, and had all the necessary contacts. The purchase arrangements were speedily completed, and they became the proud owners, knowing that there was much work that needed to be done to put it in a state suitable to receive their new family. All Terry's spare time was spent scrubbing floors, stripping old wallpaper, painting and planning the new kitchen. His brother Derek helped strip the fire surround of its dark brown paint. Sally and Terry agreed to name the house Harbury, adopting Har, Terry's hometown part of Harrow, and Berry from Sudbury, her home. The sign graced the front porch, hanging from the door canopy. They were excited that they were now in their own home. Terry could now not stop himself from walking round and round the house, thinking how lucky they were. It was unique, and he loved it. It was about this time that Harry took early retirement from the bank at the age of 60. He had looked forward to this moment with relish. He was going to do all the things that he had been dreaming of, being a grandfather, watching cricket, cycling, reading, and perhaps most of all, buying their first television set to watch westerns, his favourite films. At the mention of this, his face would wrinkle up in a tremendous smile. He would draw an even greater mouthful of smoke in and exhale through his teeth, as the wonderful thoughts, expectations, and delights regaled him. Now he could devote all his energies and time to fulfill his long-desired dreams, and the first thing he and Rita were going to do was to spend a holiday abroad. They booked a trip to Italy. Their new home, number 68 Norwood Drive, Harbury, was built in 1932, when most of the development of North Harrow had been completed. It was a semi-detached, bay-fronted house with rough-cast walls. Terry never thought he would be the owner of such a home. It was a distinct improvement on his parents', for each of the reception rooms were slightly larger, and the side entrance had sufficient room to take a garage. The garden had ample space for a family, and Terry could hardly wait to get started on its design. The neighbours had Janice, a baby girl the same age as Simon, who started school at the same time. They both attended the same class and remained so for the rest of their junior school life. They arrived with their new baby. The 2 or 3 cars that were owned in the street were parked in their driveways or tucked away in their garages. This kept the roads clear of parked cars. The road flanked, as were the majority, by a grass verge behind curbstones. Obligatory crab-apple, hawthorn or almond tree was planted squarely in the middle of the grass outside each house, provided colour and form. It was a common habit to keep the front of one's house tidy, for all had similar front gardens, a square patch of grass with a flower border, a neatly cut privet hedge that masked a draped, chain-linked fence beneath, house window frames and doors painted either green and cream or brown and cream, and most, if not all, had lace curtains. Now this may all sound rather twee and regimental, and perhaps it was, but it maintained a good overall standard of uniform behaviour rather than extreme differences. A green and pleasant land prevailed. The larder was in the hall next to the kitchen, plus an understair cupboard. Picture rails, plate racks, and dado rails in hall and landing, open spindled staircases, unpainted polished handrails, galleried landings, and wood surround fireplaces framed on a tiled hearth. The properties were solidly built, with tile-hung curved bays to the front, and French doors at the back. No drive or garage yet, but a rear entrance with wooden gate and fence. The glazed panelled front door was fitted with stained glass, as was the landing window. The kitchen was provided with a range that heated the water, a wooden dresser with cupboard beneath, and butler sink. The exposed pipework ran round the walls in keeping with the fashion of the day. The previous owners hadn't altered the house a jot, for it contained all its original fittings and fitments. Opening the back door revealed the garden and the concrete path that circled the house. Not having a shed for either coal or tools gave further proof to the property's unaltered state. The 60-foot lawn sloped down to a mature hawthorn hedge, the one-time field boundary. It stretched as far as the eye could see, all along the back gardens, giving shelter, shade, and animal byway, thereby ensuring a rural landscape throughout all the seasons. On either side of the lawn, a 3-foot wide flower border held a couple of clumps of bedraggled Michaelmas daisies and a woe-begotten phlox. The lawn, such as it was, held indentations where one-time wartime vegetable plots were laid. There was much scope for improvement. Terry and Sally moved in just prior to Easter 1960 and settled down to domesticity. Simon occupied the same bedroom at the front of the house and continued doing so for at least 3 months before taking up residence in the second bedroom to the rear. And it wasn't long before they invested in a fitted grey hair cord carpet to cover the whole house except the kitchen and bathroom. Wood parquet graced the hall.